So buckthorn's the really nasty one you have in the area. It has those purple and black berries, really dark green leaves. You'll see it green in the winter. So November, when you're out there deer hunting or you're out in your property, it'll still be green. It'll still have berries on it. It's one of the first species to leaf out in the spring too. So the best time of year to go after it is in the fall during gun deer season. So when nobody wants to be out there doing invasive species work, that is the best time to get out there though. So,
say Ben,
yeah.
When it's just maybe starting and you just have those little sprouts, those leafy sprouts.
Yep.
Would Roundup work on those?
Absolutely, yep. Roundup, glyphosate products.
So before it really gets woody and brushy.
If it's below your chest height for a lot of these different species of invasives we have, foliar sprays work great. You don't have to use quite as high of a concentration, so you're not using as much chemical. But that's a great way to handle any of the smaller plants like that. But once they start getting bigger and bigger, and you're trying to cut them down to stop them from suckering back as a thicket of those little tiny like sprigs, you're going to want to use a higher concentrate, like 20% Garlon, so glyphosate 20%, something like that, and you'll have that mix made up and directly apply it, go and kill the root system off so it won't sprout like that. Garlic mustard's another big one to look out for if you're having equipment on your property. That's the main way it invades. It's kind of scattered throughout the whole state now, except for maybe up north, and it's a biennial weed. It starts off as a little basal rosette. Looks almost like violet leaves, and then second year it erupts to maybe about this high and has these little like seed bean looking pods on the end of it. You'll see the skeletons of them in the winter. They'll still be kind of there. They almost look like a hand like this kind of reaching out. They have a ton of tiny lightweight seeds that just blow and spread, and if you're having a logger come in to thin your property, for example, you have a pine plantation that's ready to be thinned, you want to have them wash their equipment off before they get out there, because they will bring some of that stuff in. I mean, it'll take over the understory. You won't have anything else underneath it. So say you have a pine plantation that has a lot of really nice oak coming up underneath it, seed bank origin, oh, this will be a great oak stand. Well, that garlic mustard can really outcompete those seedlings and keep them suppressed. So it's a great way to, something to keep an eye on. Another really good management tool to use if it's really, really thick. I'm talking, 1,000 stems per acre of buckthorn, and it can get that thick. It can't be a complete thicket. It's called Fecon, F-E-C-O-N. It's almost like a barrel drum, kind of a saw-like thing. They have attachments for skid steers and for excavators, and it's essentially a giant mower that just demolishes anything in front of it. So if you have a plantation that's very, very thick with this stuff, and it's just like, you don't want to spread that much chemical. It's way too much money to spread that much chemical to basal bark treat, all these things, because they're too small to cut stump. If they're the size of my thumb, you don't want to be out there with the chainsaw cutting every single one. So Fecon could be a more affordable option for you. Guy comes in with a skid steer. He can mow through trees the size of this box elder here, reaching up. It'll demolish those without much of an issue at all. And so once that's done, you'd have them come back and broadcast spray as they're kind of going through, so they'd be, demolishing the invasive species and spraying behind them. It's on the front of a skid steer, so they have a fair amount of control of where they're going with it. I was on a site just the other day in a bottomlands, river bottom kind of area, and that was a great tool to use. I mean, it just completely eliminated the buckthorn. I could see the areas that hadn't been treated yet. A complete thicket to, your typical pine plantation open understory. I mean, that's what it can kind of do. So that can be a really good option there. And once, it is feconned and crushed down and mowed, a broadcast chemical, a lighter concentration of Garlon, glyphosate, can be really useful to handle invasive species. So on this property, he really has Kurt's done a good job of keeping the invasives controlled. There's the black locust over there, there's the box elder, and there's a couple buckthorns scattered around. I've got a couple more over there kind of flagged out. So there's not a lot of examples I can point out to you, but Japanese barberry is another one I've seen a lot in the area. It's a really, really thorny plant. It's kind of got kind of almost palmate little leaves coming out from it. It's only about, maybe grows this high to this high. You see it at garden centers all the time. And it has little red berries when it's mature, and very ready spreader. And it's not fun to walk through at all. It really it's like a worse version of raspberry and blackberry. So that's another really good one to control. Garlon, glyphosate, they work great for it. Just foliar treat them, you're done. You can pull them too. If you're out there, pulling is a great option. If you're wandering your woods, just kind of moving your way through, just if you see something, pull it. I wish I had some more examples to kind of give you of what these plants look like. But like I said, Kirk's done too good of a job keeping his property healthy and clean.
I've heard that barberry, the ticks like to live in the barberry bushes. Have you heard that?
They like that kind of size of plant. That's what they like to really attach to your legs and your animals' legs and move up. It's also really good for mice habitat, I think, too. With how dense it is, there's a lot of mice are the primary vector of like tick-borne illnesses. So,
Yeah, so if you've got a woodlot that's full of barberry, you're probably going to have a lot of ticks.
yeah, the mice like it for habitat, and then that's the primary way those ticks really mature. So,
So Ben, after you fecon, how soon after would you spray?
as soon as possible.
Okay.
You want to get that chemical into those open cuts before the
So
plant
that's
has a
what you
chance
do
to seal itself off.
Okay.
So you're trying to get that chemical into that still live tissue
Fresh.
so it can suck it down into the root system.
What's too late?
A week after, I'd think. Even that would be too late. I wouldn't do it the day after or the same day of. I mean, those fecon machines, they move quick, and a lot of those guys will do both. They might even have attachments for the back of their skid steer that will act as a broadcast sprayer, or they'll have like a UTV or an ATV with a mount in the back. They'll have somebody else just kind of puttering around while they're doing their thing. So, I mean, that's the easy way, but, you know, it's heavy equipment on your property, so there are the concerns about equipment on your property, you know, rutting and things like that. You have to kind of play it by ear with what you need to do there.
If you're an MFL certified, can you use that chemical?
Which one?
The one for treating it after you grind everything up?
Yep, Garlon glyphosate. Yep, those are absolutely fine to use on those properties. Yep, those are not an issue. What I've got here, this is from Kirk. These are called Velpar tablets. Hexazinine, I think, is the active ingredient. And if you see behind me, there's a bunch of dead oak over there. That's actually not from oak wilt. He has a really good view from the top of this hill, and one of his landowner objectives was to open up his view down the valley. He was telling me earlier this morning that, I think both his daughters got married up there, and great view all throughout the valley, but he kept having to fight off, things coming back up. So those Velpar tablets, they are like Tordon. They kill everything. Unlike Tordon, though, these are a soil active ingredient, so they will stay in the soil when they dissolve, and they continue to kill stuff all the time. So if you look over there, closer to us, you see those live leaves. He had treated those this spring, and that's they leafed out and then they died. And there's nothing coming back in there except for maybe a little bit of raspberry. So if you're looking for a really broad area to really scorch and burn, to say you're going to replant or something like that, those tablets can be a really good option. And he was telling the last group, because he was here with them, I mean, it's just little tablets. You can kind of spread them as you need them. From what he was telling me, it's 1 tablet per inch of the tree for size. That's how many you need in the area to kill it, or to be that control. So he just uses it around for weed control as well. Just boop, done. It'll kill, it'll dissolve in the rain, and it'll kill whatever's around it. So that kind of leads me to my next thing about like kind of site prep. If you're going to be doing a planting in the spring and you're concerned about, say it's an old ag field and you've got weeds coming up and invasives coming in, you want to really control that for the future. There's a product called Oust you can apply in the fall. It acts as a pre-emergent killer, so it'll break down in the fall, it'll kill everything off over winter, and in the spring you can do your planting and the trees won't be impacted at all. I will note for this as well before I forget, red pine are like the only species that do not get killed by this. So Dan Peterson was actually the one that brought this to my attention. When he worked for Verso, they would use that on the red pine plantations. They'd kill everything else but the red pine, and then they would just grow like mad. So if you have a red pine plantation, those could be a really good option, especially if you're trying to get it off the ground. It's within that, maybe hip height size. That'd be a great option to use. So getting back to what I was saying about Oust, it's apply it in the fall, it'll kill in the fall, and then in the spring you're ready to plant. That acts as your initial weed control, so you can get your planting done, you can get your trees installed. After they're installed, the biggest way to keep your trees alive is mowing, and tubing if the deer are a problem. If you're doing like an oak planting, I would highly advise using tree tubes, or plant such a large area the deer can't physically eat every stem, because they will around here. I mean, they love it. So mowing is a really, really good way to control the weeds that come up when those trees are small. That's a brush, like a brush saw on the back of your tractor, ATV, there's tons of different options, but that'll really keep those weeds down, keep those trees open to the sun, keep them growing. I was in a planting just the other day. It was a 10-year checkup on it, and I was maybe finding, I think my average was like 250 spruce per acre, and it should have been planted at like 800. That's how many died because they were suppressed by the weeds. They were just choked out by the elderberry, the box elder, the raspberry. They just couldn't grow. You know, if there's deer in the area, it's definitely more of a concern too, because they will eat everything. So they make tree tubes now that are biodegradable, and essentially as the tree grows, the pressure of the bark, it won't girdle the tree, like it won't, it's meant to break, the tubes are. So they'll just split the tubes and they'll fall off, and then they'll decompose and they're done. Those tubes act as kind of a greenhouse as well, so they keep the tree growing earlier and they keep it warmer, so like, you know, frost snaps, things like that, they won't impact it as much. One big concern if you're doing tubing is mice love them for habitat if you're not mowing around them. It acts as a greenhouse for the tree, so in the winter, if you have weeds all around it, that's a nice little warm spot for those mice. And then they'll come in there, they'll make their nest, and they'll girdle the tree. They'll just nibble away at that bark and kill it. So to kind of mitigate that, if you weed whip several feet around those tubes you have installed, that'll, you know, in the winter keep it open enough that it won't be a preferred habitat for the mice. It's just too much cold, they won't like it. So yeah, I guess at this point, are there any questions you guys have? I've kind of thrown a lot at you.
That garland we treated like box elders and so forth, but when there were white pines or reds next to it, we killed some of those too. So it goes down and mingles with the roots and goes to these guys' roots, right?
How were you applying it? Was it a foliar spray? Or was it direct applicant to like a stump you cut?
At that time, yeah, we just sprayed around the base of the tree.
Okay. So that could have been a little bit of that drift I'm talking. So you were spraying the side of...
Well, no, these were small, and we just went around like the top or the bottom 6-8 inches, right around like that.
Okay. After you'd cut it?
No, didn't cut it.
Okay. Did it kill the buckthorn off?
These were
box elder. Did it kill them off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It could have been a little bit of that drift, you know, that chemical moving off. That is a concern when you're doing kind of that basal bark treatment. Depending on how the chemical is mixed and agitated in the container, you can also kind of determine how it's going to spread as well. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, John? I mean, I would guess drift. I don't think it really translocates that readily.
Yeah, that would be my guess too, that perhaps, you know, in the spraying, some of it drifted and got onto those.
That would be my guess. How far away were those pines at from your box elder you killed?
The ones that were affected mostly were downhill from this box elder. You know, so however the spacing was, you know, 4 or 5 feet, I suppose, sometimes.
That far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think the chemical could have been mixed a little too hot, and maybe I'm not sure. Typically, when you mix chemical too hot, you know.
Well, I guess the question is, does it affect the roots and intermingle with other roots?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. The box elder and the pine roots or spruce roots wouldn't have.
They don't graft together.
Wouldn't have grafted together.
They wouldn't get along.
No.
Okay. So it had to be up about then.
I would believe so, because that chemical doesn't stay in the soil like this Velpard does. It typically stays in the live tissue of whatever you're affecting. It's a systematic killer, so it'll absorb in and then kill it off. If you make a chemical too hot, so you put too much of that active ingredient in there, you know, it might sound good, you know, for cut stump, for example, we advise 20%. If you make it 50%, you're not going to kill the roots off. You're just going to kill immediately what you spray. It'll be such a high concentration, it'll just immediately kill the top off, and it'll just sprout up underneath. So there is kind of that golden area for how hot you want to make your chemical. The label should have that kind of displayed for what you want to use for things like that. If you make it too hot as well and it drifts, it could really kill other things around it. I was working with Adam Foringer, the guy on Station 1, on some black locust on some state land around Perot State Park, and we just had a little bit of chemical left, so we ended up, our mixture was just a little too hot, and we ended up having a little bit of drift too. Just we were spraying stuff about this size and doing kind of cut stumps, so he was sawing through some of these black locusts, and I was kind of hitting it with that milestone chemical as he sawed, and we went back there 2 weeks later and we did see a little bit of drift from that. So I mean, it can really drift when you're doing that spray, especially if you're doing that foliar stuff. If you're doing cut stump, you know, right there at the chemical, it won't be able to go. And that basal bark, when you're using that like what he was using, what's his name? Jack, how Jack was using it, basal bark uses the most amount of chemical for what you're using, because you have to cover every side of that tree evenly or completely to have that absorb in and kill the tissue. If you leave a spot open, I'm sure you've seen trees that are horribly, horribly wounded, and how is that tree alive? It's got like this live tissue on a tree this big, and it's still going strong. That's what'll happen with that basal bark if you miss a spot. It won't really kill it off. So if you hit buckthorn, you'll have like mostly dead branches, and there'll be like one that's still green. So that is a thing to be aware of if you're doing that basal bark treatment. I've got a set up over here an example of a cut stump and how to apply. There are dauber applicants you can get, so like little maybe 6-inch or 6-ounce bottles with a little sponge applicator. So if you're out in your woods just kind of doing a walkthrough or something like that, and you see an invasive species or a tree you don't want like box elder, and you have a saw or tool with you to cut that, these little daubers don't weigh anything, are on that live tissue layer, it's done.